now moving away from water and into the trees. So first up is forestry / management.
Malcolm was, or Paul, are you covering this for Malcolm, or is Malcolm?
Oh, no, Malcolm was coming as well. But,
Next door, or is he going upstairs? He may have anticipated a 1 o'clock.
How about if we do the certificate of appreciation nominations while we're waiting for the crew? Is there somebody who can speak to that?
Look, I can speak to that. This follows a request from Council that we regularise the practice of recognising good environmental stewardship based on the fact we've had some ad hoc presentations in recent times, and the Council did resolve to creating these 3 committees and having a process that is based on councillors nominating people for awards. So we're just setting in motion here a process that asks councillors by the end of this month to provide nominations, and then we can then do the subsequent follow-up work to prepare for an awards ceremony on the 28th of November. So it should be reasonably straightforward, but I'll just take the opportunity to encourage councillors to provide us with their nominations.
Mr. Chairman,
Everyone? Councillor Dick.
I just think there's some scarcity value in these awards, so that, we should not try and do everything all together, and maybe do 3 or 4 or 5 a year max.
So, Councillor, when we have the discussion in public excluded session on the 24th of October, I think that gives an opportunity for Council to have a discussion about how it wishes to rationalise these and whether the nominations are all of perhaps a comparable nature that merit awards, and certainly staff will also draw to Council's attention whether we've got any concerns about any of the applicants who may have issues that people are not aware of or something like that.
I look at the environmental leadership and land management, and we support the Balanced Farm Environment Award, so I don't really see why we're getting into that space. I kind of liked how we did it with June Graham, and I think that what was the last? The last
Alexander's.
Yes. That was a little bit special or unique in terms of circumstances, but yeah, I'd be a bit careful in sort of diving into Balanced Farm Environmental Awards and other awards around the place.
Councillor, these categories have already been decided by Council, so this is policy that we're just implementing.
Yeah, we might look at it and think, is that right or not? A bit like what I raised last week at Council meeting.
I'm comfortable with the policy we've got down here already. I don't think we're trampling on anyone's toes. And I'd like to move move the recommendation.
Seconder? Or
That would receive the
Yes, I'll see
the call. Anything more to say?
no, fine, thanks.
So we can have our debate around the allocation of these and the exclusivity of them and focus of them can be entertained at the October meeting where we see what's on the table in front of us. Anyone else wish to comment? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? No? Okay, now we're back to forestry / management.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. It's a report prepared by Liz Lambert with input from the consents team around slash management from a plantation forestry point of view. Key discussion in here is on the national environment standards that have come into effect in May this year. which do put more opportunity for the regional council to manage forestry. But a lot of the NES is providing for forestry as a permitted activity. Large areas where forestry is to occur can occur as a permitted activity with conditions and with compliance with matters including how they manage the slash. The permitted activity regime, the legislation allows that we are able to recover costs for monitoring permitted activities through the NES. So it does give us the opportunity to have staff monitoring and ensuring compliance on the ground, and there is some resourcing that's come into the compliance team to assist in that. And from the consenting team point of view, we've looked at ensuring some capacity for us to be able to process applications where consent is required.
You haven't changed.
Paul again is sort of leading the management of any consents that come through, so is able to answer some of the questions probably around what has been done in the space, although we've received perhaps 2 consents for forestry, particular forestry activities, and we've received some minor consents where people have not properly conformed with matters such as giving 20 days notice of actually going on site and harvesting. So there's some very minor matters that for which we gave consent for to let them through their non-compliance. So probably that's enough in the way of introduction. If you have read the report, there's probably questions arising.
I'll lead off. In your judgment, effectively applying these rules, will that ensure that Hawke's Bay is a model of best practice for managing the harvesting that's coming our way? Or do we need to do more, and what might that more be, if so?
Yeah. So the regulations that are contained in the NES were basically the best practice measures that were picked from all the consent conditions that the councils have around the country in order to try and achieve a consistent best practice approach. So some of the things in there, like managing slash and keeping it on stable ground out of floodplains, those are the sorts of best practice measures that should be undertaken. And then in higher risk areas where the erosion risk has been judged as high or very high, you're into a consenting framework, and through that process you could put additional requirements to try and manage that risk better. So it's sort of two layers. But yeah, the regulations themselves are meant to represent the sort of best practice measures from around the country.
What it then relies on is that, particularly where it's permitted, that they do adhere to that. And I think that relies on us being quite reasonably active in a compliance space to actually be observing and going on land to actually see how people are performing. There has been quite a lead in and quite an involvement with some of the main forestry players in Hawke's Bay to understand the NES and to talk with us to get an understanding of how we're going to administer the provisions. So there's been reasonable, and the industry was quite active in getting these standards established because they wanted consistency across the country so that they weren't crossing boundaries and getting different approaches. So we've worked quite actively with a number who are showing us what their practice is and what they will be providing in order to meet the conditions of the NES.
Chair, sorry, could I just provide a supplementary response to your question? Because I want to note the fact that this is an extraordinarily difficult area to regulate, and I want to give 2 examples from the regulations. The first of which is that slash should not be on land that would be covered by water during a 5% AEP event. Now, to give effect to that regulation, a forestry operator and our own staff undertaking compliance will need to essentially be able to draw a line on a piece of land about where water may or may not be in a 5% annual exceedance period event. Now, there's an intent behind this which you understand, but the practicalities of being specific about that and prosecuting or holding people to account for this is extraordinarily difficult. The other is in that slash from harvesting must be placed onto stable ground. Now, most of the slash that we see is on slopes of extraordinary steepness and often on relatively soft sedimentary rocks and the like that under normal heavy rainfall will have some degree of erosion associated with it. So I don't think that would constitute stable ground. So it's going to be really difficult, I think, in practice, getting the intent of these regulations, delivering with absolute confidence the outcomes that are being sought, and that's inherent in the activity. So this is going to be a long game of continuous improvement in the way we do it and the way the industry does it, and I think what we'll be looking for is measurable improvement over time rather than in a relatively quick period getting to some level of kind of regulatory perfection.
Councillor,
Yeah,
actually, I was going to recognise Councillor Wilson first.
Thank you, Chair. So my question is around number 4 on page 89. So you've got the list of eight actions there: forestation, pruning, thinning to waste, etc. Can someone just tell me how much of that is tied into the local authority district plans, and how much actually sits with us? I mean, quarrying, yeah, I get that. We'll be all over that. But actually, afforestation, trees that are planted in the wrong place and then the subsequent effect is downstream. I mean, the TAs do the doing stuff, we do the effects of the doing stuff in very, very broad terms. Can someone tell me how you're going to differentiate between what the district plan covers and what we cover?
Yeah, Paul might be best fixed to answer that. There is a bit of prescription in the NES to say who's got jurisdiction over what aspects.
Yeah, so there's a mixture, but the regulations specify which parts of each activity are dealt with by who, which council, and what which aspects. So for the district council and afforestation, it might be the setback from dwellings and shading. They also receive notices of harvesting, and there's other regulations that relate specifically to TA functions, noise and things like that as well. So it is quite set out quite explicitly which part of each activity is dealt with by which council.
So can we, just supplementary to that, can we then have a fairly clear understanding pre-event who's done what and who will be doing what, and on that basis how much interaction have we had with the territorials, considering the NES has been out for a month or two now?
3 months. We haven't had. We've had some interaction with local council staff, and I think there is a working group that's been established, which Liz, I think, was going to attend as well, that Hastings have promoted around slash management. So I'm not sure when that's starting. I'm not sure if Malcolm knows. But
No, I don't. I hadn't actually heard of that group. So there was a bit of an initiative, I understand, from the districts to have a regional discussion. So we will look to engage in that. We have actually been engaging with the other regions to sort of look at consistent approaches and look across the boundary at how they're managing consent.
Councillor Bevan.
Thanks, Chair. I'm just going back to the comments that you made earlier on, James, about looking for an improvement over time. That worries me, and it'll worry a lot of people in this community, because that's the one thing we don't have, is the luxury of time here. We've got an avalanche of wood coming at us. and there are going to be some serious problems. We all know there are going to be some serious problems with slash and forestry management and making tracks and all the rest of it. And I'm really concerned about this Rule 20 permitted activity conditions slash on page 90 of our papers. 5% AEP is a 1 in 20 year event, right? Who makes the call on whether a 1 in 20 year event on any piece of land where there's forest is going to cause the slash to run off or is going to cause it to be sitting in pools of water? Who makes that call? Do we make that call? Or does the forestry manager or the owner, lander, who makes that call?
In the first instance,
How the hell do they do it?
it's forestry, basically to remain permitted and compliant,
Yeah.
should be looking to observe this condition.
I understand that.
We would need to go on the land and have an appreciation of what that line is to actually call them to task and say, no, you're too near or you're
Right,
not.
so have we done any work to establish how many of the forests in our entire region are actually on flat or flattish land? Because it seems to me that everything else is at risk. And I can't recall, correct me if I'm wrong, but I can't recall seeing many forests at all that are not on slopes. And I would have thought the moment you get a slope above X, and you guys can probably do some calculations on what the X slope is, I would have thought any forest that's on a slope above X is going to be at risk of slash moving off in a 1 in 20 year event.
Yes, so Councillor, I think that probably goes to the Rule 69(1), which is placed on stable ground. With respect to the 5% AEP event, the wording is that the land would be covered. So I think what is implied there is watercourses, so that they would be, rather than on the slopes, they would be in the valleys, and it would be how far back from a watercourse, either an ephemeral watercourse or how far back from a permanent watercourse should slash be, to ensure that if rainfall was of that volume, it wouldn't be carried down in the water body. In practice, the way this will work is that our compliance staff going and doing permitted activity monitoring will have a reasonable conversation with the operator on site about, that's looking a bit close to the waterway, get it well back. And I mean, there's no merit, I think, in anyone going into vast science modelling about, where the water will precisely be at 5% versus 6% or whatever. So it will be a bunch of guesswork and there'll be a reasonableness test. I would expect that the industry would want to take a responsible view and be precautionary and get slash well back from any potential water body that's going to run during the rainfall event.
Okay, so with respect, James, I see no evidence that this is a responsible industry. So that tells me that we need to take a proactive stand, and I would have thought we would need to go out to all identified forest managers, owners, and say, you need to come and talk to us before you commence any harvesting activity, and we want to come and have a look at your land and make some determinations on what you need to do.
So I'm not sure that we can actually do that because these are permitted activity rules, although there are notification requirements in the regulations. I think what I am confident in is that our compliance team have additional resources to deal with this issue and have recruited recently for that purpose. They will have a program of work going across all of the forest operators in the region, and they will be going through checking compliance with those permitted activity rules. Just as we do in other sectors, we can't eat the elephant all in one go, so we will be doing it, and there'll be some risk assessment about who are the operators we're more concerned about. There are some operators that have been in this game for a very long time, and I'm happy to name Panpack as an example, that do extensive planning around their harvesting and have very proactive management around slash. They would probably be at the back of the queue in terms of priority for us for going and checking on that compliance. But we've been working with the industry groups so they understand all the expectations here and that they know we will be going out there and doing compliance work. I expect in the fullness of time, when we have our annual compliance report, that you will see forestry companies that will be in receipt of either infringement notices or prosecutions for not meeting the standards required in these regulations.
So just a couple more questions, Chair, if you would indulge me, does the standard apply to harvests that have already commenced prior to 1 May or not?
No.
So if you manage to get a digger on site or something prior to 1 May, you're home free?
If you commenced harvesting prior to 1 May, you're entitled to have done that without the need for any consent or to actually be compliant with the NES, and I think you've got grace for 6 months.
November.
Yeah. But after that date, 6 months on November, you need to have lined up with the NES.
So somebody who started harvest prior to 1 May does not need to be compliant with the NES, is that what I'm hearing?
Until November.
Yeah.
Till November.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but they
That's 6
could have
months.
got past that. They could have done that block of harvesting, so that would be complete.
Yep.
But if they moved on to carry on harvesting, this area would need to be done in accord with the NES.
Right, okay. And what about the replanting or planting? Does anybody that's doing planting or replanting need to get a consent from us?
No. No, there's a set of permitted activity regulations and consents are required. Replantings are a controlled activity on red erosion susceptibility class land. So
this same 20% or 5%, sorry, AEP applies?
No, it's based on topography and
yeah,
soils.
that's right. Yeah, it's an erosion risk zone that MPI have mapped, and so within red areas, replanting requires a consent.
Oh, so there's actually a map that says if you're in the red zone, you have to get a permit to plant?
That's right.
If
yeah.
you're outside the red zone or zones, you don't?
Yeah.
Yes,
So
right,
across a forest,
Yep.
you'll have pockets where you need consent, and the other areas, you can do it as per the permitted activity rules.
Yep. Yep.
But some of the conditions in there include setbacks from streams. Can't think what else. Crossings, a variety of things that
yeah.
they should still do in compliance with the conditions. So in a stream situation, they shouldn't be planting within. It's 10 metres of 5 metre wide flowing stream.
And they apply to the permitted activity new forest establishment as well as to those that need to come through the consent track, as I understand. So there are standards, if you like, that still have to be met, which are higher than previously, for people establishing forests on relatively flat country with low or no erosion risk. So there's still things that they need to meet, but they don't have to go through a consenting process.
Councillor Bailey.
Oh, Councillor Barkham had his. You always swing from the left to the right, I've noticed, Chair, so let's be consistent for us today.
Councillor Bell.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of questions on these, on section 20 and section 69. I'm just curious to know how you're going to, how you see interpreting it. When it talks about, so for example in section 20, subsection 2, talks about printing and threading must be removed from water body, blah, blah, blah. Unless to do so would be unsafe. I'm curious to know how someone could harvest the forest and then to go around and harvest the forest and then to be deemed later it'd be unsafe to go around and pick up and clean up the slash.
Well, there could be situations where getting down into that stream gully may be unsafe if it's steep. You know, it could just be.
I mean, I find it surprising it's safe enough to harvest, yet it's unsafe. It's too unsafe to deal with what's left over.
It could have fallen to the. So it could have been harvested further away, but on a slope, and actually fallen to the water body, or near the water body.
So look, I've visited a site on a Pampac forest that had a huge rocky ravine in the middle of it. There was forestry harvest activity happening above that. After they'd moved through, there was slash all through the ravine, if you like, and there was just no way that they were going to send anyone down to tie steel cables around those logs and try and extract them. And that was that's the sort of example that we're talking about there.
So sorry, if I could just ask a supplementary. So if you're giving a consent for a piece of forest like that, which I imagine you'd have to, because it would fit under this rule, would we then say, if we were, had the opportunity to give them a consent with conditions, you can't let that happen. You have to take everything out when you harvest the tree. Don't cut the slash off in situ. Take the whole thing out and do it where it's safe.
Yeah, maybe there's going to be occasions where we would be saying it's not safe to harvest. Don't harvest. Or in advance, don't plant. Yeah.
So
It's
the
too
case,
late if the forest's there, it's too
well,
late for
the
that.
case I just referred to, that the forest managers said to us when we were on site, is that we're not going to replant this area. We're going to let it go back to native reversion because this has been dangerous and difficult, and it's a crazy place to have a forest, but we inherited this and it just is what it is. So there are areas that we would expect would be precluded from forest establishment because of the nature of the
That doesn't
country.
answer my question,
Yeah.
which is you've got a forest, somebody comes to us for a consent to harvest it, you know that if they clear the slash in situ, you know where it's going to go and you don't want it to go there, so you say to them, the consent requires you to remove the tree in its entirety from that part of the site.
At the point of harvest.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, potentially you could put it in as a condition if you could justify it on the basis of the environmental effect.
Yeah, that's precisely what I'm suggesting.
Yeah, and so given the nature of slash and the environmental effect it has, then potentially that's the case. Could be a very big call.
Wouldn't the alternative be the best thing to say you can't, it requires consent, no consent, because you can't harvest it and make sure that you get all the slash out?
Potentially.
That'd be the answer. Prevention rather than sometime later.
All in at some point.
Yeah. Sorry, go on.
I guess the question also then goes to where you're taking the slash to. So if you're 100 kilometres from the nearest mill, you're right up the back blocks, taking every last branch from that forest is going to be a completely uneconomic proposition.
Yeah, but consider the alternative.
Yeah. So current forest practice in New Zealand has vast amounts of slash left in forest at the point of harvest.
What we're hearing of Panpack is because they use the timber to actually fuel their mill.
The slash, you mean?
Yeah. So they're taking more of the log off than other operators.
They do.
So there's some practices
where
like
it's
that which could be beneficial.
Councillor
Yeah,
Hewitt.
sorry, Chair, I had one further question.
Councillor Hewitt.
Sorry.
Only Councillor Bevan gets supplementary questions.
I only have one.
He'll come back to you. Say indulgence.
Better hang on to your time.
One of the quite topical issues was the Forestry National Environmental Standards that was discussed in our long-term plan, and I'm wondering how is this going to be communicated out into our region? Especially because when people realised that some of them needed a consent with harvesting, they weren't aware of that before. And I'm talking about some quite experienced operators.
Yeah, good question. We've sort of done it at, and again, Paul can probably answer a bit better than I can. We've done it at the larger scale level. I think we have met with smaller forestry groups. So generally that message has gone to those immediate, obvious people. And we have worked to put some stuff on the website so people can see some stuff there, but Paul might add to that.
No, that's right. We've had a working group set up with the main industry people for some time in advance of May, and there is the farm forest group as well, which has been is also active and has received information, and the other there has been a number of MPI workshops as well. But it's just
Would anybody at this end like to speak?
I'd like
Have a question? Councillor Parker.
Oh, yeah, I'd like to. I'd like to ask whether... Thank you for looking right for once, Chair. Very good. I'd like to ask about the prospect of the council hosting a public forum on forestry management and forestry harvesting, because there is a deep well of public concern about this, and I think the council has to not only act, has to seem to act. And at the moment, I don't think the publics are seeing the council acting.
The second point I'd make is that whilst we might have national standards, we can also, I think, set other standards by agreement. And I do so suggest this on the basis that whatever activity foresters do, they do in a way with, people have used the word licence, with the permission of the community. And if what they do is having a devastating effect on the community have a right to react to that. And we've seen some situations where the community reaction has been really strong, and justly so. So I'd like to add to the amendment, to the recommendation here, an amendment that the staff come back with a report to council on the prospect of this council hosting a forum of councils, I include Gisborne, the local councils, forest owners, forest planters, forest harvesters and communities to discuss the current circumstance of which we find ourselves with forestry in the region, the MPS and other issues, to try and find a way which we agree as a community, councils, community and foresters, about what are to be the standards for forestry in this region.
I'll second that.
Can I just add that they've just had one in Central Hawke's Bay, covered off carbon credits as well. It was really well attended.
All right,
about 100 people.
I'll amend the resolution with all other things, excepting Central Hawke's Bay.
There's an interest down there. So.
Yep, I'm just joking. But I just think, I'd like to, that's my question, could we do that? And if so, I'd like to move a resolution.
Anybody have a reservation about that? Okay, we'll minute that.
Thank you.
Yeah, can I just put it up there to...
Well, we're at that stage yet. Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. Now I've almost forgotten what my question was.
Good.
Yeah. Paragraph 15, down to section 69, and James, you made comment about point 1, the slash from harvesting must be placed on the stable ground, and the fact we've got a challenge here in Hawke's Bay, obviously, with the soil types we've got. I take it from your comments that you're not reading that to mean that all slash has to be removed from slopes.
Well, look, my question is what is the definition of stable ground? And I don't know whether the regulations have got a definition in there of stable ground. I suspect they probably don't. But it's going to be a heck of a test for our compliance staff.
You would think that, sorry, your indulgence, Chair, I'd think then that would be one question that you may want to ask the industry, exactly where that line sits, so that we're all conscious of where it's at. That's all right.
I have a question with the reporting or the notice requirement that's referred to in 13 and 14. Would this mean that effectively we will have a rolling inventory or calendar of where harvesting is going to be occurring? So we're at least 20 to 60 days ahead of the curve. And is that sufficient? I mean, so it sounds like we will know what's going to happen out there. And is that seems like short notice, but.
Yeah, we get a notice. We can request the harvest management plan at that stage, and then they've got another time period to give us that, and that would then feed into a monitoring decision as to whether to go and visit that
So you
forest.
can triage on the basis of getting these notices where you think there might be particularly problematic situations.
And I think the track record of the operator will feed into the degree of attention they get.
Yeah.
So it's now 3 months since this policy statement came into effect. How many actual applications have you received?
We've received about, start with the notices. We've got about 60 odd notices of activities occurring, and we've received 5 or 6 applications so far.
So that means 55 out of 60 forest owners don't regard their land as falling within the category of being at risk, which is, I would have thought, extraordinary. It really worries me.
They need to refer to the plan in terms of the red zones, so it's unambiguous in terms of whether they need a consent or not for certain activities because of their slope and soil type. So they look at that and they can determine quite quickly whether they're in or out. So by rights, they should be outside those zones when they're giving us notice of their intention to harvest. So they should know.
Well, that's saying to me we've got the lines in the wrong places. Because I just simply don't believe that 55 out of 60, what's that? That's like near 90% of forests don't pose a risk. It's just nonsense.
But it's so MPI maps the risk zones, and it's
They've got it wrong then.
and then it's they need consent when they come to harvest or to replant within the red zones. So they won't necessarily be harvesting in one of those zones at the current time. There might be yet to get to an area like that, but they could be in a forest outside of the red zone operating as a permitted activity.
With your indulgence, Peter, I'd like to have supplementary to that one. Something tonight. Can we have a copy of a map of the red zones? So
They're online. They're all on. Yep.
Can you get us a hard copy of those for us? I don't really want to go the effort of searching for it all.
Okay, Councillor Barker, can you crystallise your...
I'm typing. I'm struggling here.
Okay,
I've just been...
because I think we're at that point.
You need more questions.
I need a couple more questions. Give me more time. Peter, do some more indulging.
You doing it?
I was trying to...
You're simply asking for a form of all the relevant stakeholders.
Yeah.
And Gisborne to
Forestry management.
or forest
Woodville.
councils and interested groups. All right, here we are. Here's this for a start. Should have an email there shortly. Just that Councillor Bevan was particularly lucid today, and I was
Trying to capture that.
We've taken up, so he's finding the map for us.
to get your email, Annalie.
Not yet.
What's wrong with the server here? It shows you I could have written it by hand.
There it is.
I could have written it by hand and got it there quicker.
What? That's just unbelievable.
It was remapped just before the regulations took force and changed quite a bit.
So there's a fair bit up in Warra by the looks.
Incredible.
Kind of corresponds with our sedimentation map, doesn't it?
Kind of does, but
There's basically nothing in Seven Hawke's
See,
Bay.
see some big hills there. Red. You got green.
Out on the coast, there's a bit there.
Just a little bit on the coast and that's it.
So I guess it's where you've got extreme erosion risk. You haven't got any erosion risk.
plus AD.
Plus AD.
sorts.
Yeah.
7 and AD, that is.
Okay, can we,
It's amazing.
Just the yellow.
If that's the case, I mean, that kind of, like, as you say, that kind of ties in with we see our erosion risk. How challenging would it be for us to add additional red zones in there?
You can't really have rules which are more onerous than the NES. So, in relation to forestry, we can sort of do it for other reasons, but no, I don't think we can.
Mr. Chairman, I think we're running the risk of trying to micromanage. This is something new, it's reported to us, it will develop and grow, and I think the appropriate thing to do is to accept Councillor Barker's resolution and let's move on.
I second that motion. I'm just waiting for it to pop up here.
Okay. Should come around now.
All right.
Oh, that's a beautiful thing.
I tried to do it
Okay.
in my big pentameter, but
But James, would you just see that set number 2 happening through the Farm Foresters Association?
I don't think anyone else got that.
No, I think there's a range of parties. I think the commercial forestry sector, farm foresters.
You willing to change that to a public conference or a public forum?
Well, it is kind of public, isn't it?
Okay.
Aye.
Get
so-
Greg's paneling of foresters.
We have a motion. Councillor Dick, you supported that, and all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passed, okay. Next forest issue.
Aren't we out of the woods yet?
Not out of the woods yet.
Long haul yet.
Forestry investment update.
Thank you, Chair.
It's 2:15, Chair.
Look, I think councillors should all be aware that the Tūtira Accord has now been signed by the chairs of both ourselves and Ngāti Kahungunu, and our work is underway in relation to that, particularly in relation to some applications to the Provincial Growth Fund for funding support for the development work that both ourselves and Ngāti Kahungunu want to do to develop the underpinning information and infrastructure for the upscaling of regional afforestation. In parallel, we now have the integrated catchment management teams, the three teams spread across the regions, stood up, and they are engaging with landowners, and we're starting to collect information from of landowners that wish to participate in erosion control planting with our assistance, and the planning is underway for an increase in that increased demand. It's noted there that we've trebled the order for native plants for next winter, and I would expect that this activity will gain momentum considerably in the coming months as our newly located and newly appointed staff increase the level of engagement and field days, etc., with landowners. So we're just really laying the groundwork for this work. The key piece of work, which I circulated the terms of reference to councillors last night, in terms of our forestry investment activity, is the Right Tree, Right Place regional study. So it's taken us longer than we'd hoped to get this work underway, just by virtue of needing to pull together an advisory team from a range of different parties to bring all their expertise to bear, so that we can spatially map the different forest system options for the region, understand the economics and financial implications for the council of establishing forest in those places. That work is scheduled really for the next 6 months, and enable us to come forward by the end of the year, early next year, with a fairly comprehensive picture of the investment opportunity for council in forestry. And we expect that will give a range of options, from the financially attractive to probably, as we will confront in the Tūtira replanting example, much higher cost, lower return, but very strongly environmentally positive options as well. So all that will come forward. We've also got a Provincial Growth Fund bid being prepared around matching the funding that was provided in the long-term plan for erosion and riparian planting, and also a bid which has been cooking for a while around LIDAR, which will improve our ability to do farm and forestry planning at fine scale. So the overall impression I'd like to leave you with is that there is a fairly broad volume of activity going on across the council, and in partnership with HBRIC and also with Ngāti Kahungunu, to lay the foundations for this endeavour. So from my perspective, everything's on track. Has taken longer than we would anticipate. There's no guarantees about the financial support we'll receive from central government, but we'll be boxing on with this. Central government funding will ultimately determine probably how fast we can go, and the scale at which we can approach this opportunity. So Chair, that's where we're at as of today.
Councillor Burton?
Oh,
I
thank
noticed I
you.
went to the right first.
Thank you, going to the right. I don't know if I qualify.
I did hesitate.
We second-class citizens back here. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, James, for the paper. I actually made some notes to it before your late night missive last night, which detailed some of the answers to some of my queries in any event. But what I wanted to ask you and see whether we could get some minor tweaking of the development of the project. Firstly, I'd just ask if the Kahatia Accord and Right Tree, Right Place project were one and the same, or one was subservient to the other. Can you just help me the status of each of these nominated entities? So Right Tree, Right Place is an input into the Kahatia Accord. The expectation is that the information arising from the project will be made available to Ngāti Kahungunu under the Accord. They made a decision along the way that they didn't wish to co-fund the Right Tree, Right Place proposal. Instead, they wanted to put their funding into developing a proposal with central government around the workforce and nursery supply. So their focus is very much on the social and cultural dimensions of this and getting opportunities for tangata whenua to be involved commercially in forestry and in a diverse range of forestry is their primary objective. It's about work largely. Our objectives are primarily environmental, so we've agreed a sensible division of labour really in terms of who's doing both, and they come together under the Kahatia Accord and are mutually reinforcing.
Sure. Well, thank you for that, and that clarifies it for me. I note under your notes at paragraphs 5, should be 5.1, etc. The area that I'm interested to distill a little further under, it's called 4.4, I guess it's out of sync a little, is increase regional biodiversity. And I wonder whether it's worth two things. Firstly, being a little more focused with that by essentially saying, and I've written here, substantially increase the scale of indigenous or native vegetation. If you're taking on the role of increased regional biodiversity, if that's that big, I wonder whether it's a little narrower than that. So that's my first comment, is perhaps tweaking that. The second comment relates to a paper a little later on in terms of biodiversity, the Biodiversity Foundation, and I see there's some complementarity in regard to their outputs. That's nearly as long as Wheelbarrow. So just in regard to the group that the participants in the consortium singular, from your paper last night, Right Tree, Right Place, I wonder whether it's worth considering the input of the Biodiversity Foundation as a player in that space alongside your other players. So that's that comment to
Can I just respond to that? As a trustee of the Biodiversity Foundation, I would suggest that there's limited expertise and capacity within the trust itself as an entity. We do have Mike Halliday as an example, who's a trustee of that, who's also a former regional chair of the Farm Forestry Association. What I suggest we do is that we involve them in the advisory group that we propose to oversee this body of work.
I guess the point I'm trying to make is that alongside those commercial employment, etc., related values, is a vital strand of this council's direction of travel, and that's around biodiversity, indigenous vegetation enhancement, etc. So useful to get that in there, and I've circulated the Canterbury. I'm pleased to see Canterbury University Forestry School engaged in it, but I think it helps shape the way in which this whole project is rolled out if it has an overarching value around indigenous vegetation alongside sedimentation, etc.
Councillor Bevan?
Thanks, Chair. And thank you for the paper, James. So the emissions trading scheme and any income we might be able to earn from it is probably reasonably critical to the success for this whole thing. And you've got some comments on the emissions trading scheme in number 11, page 96, on the government having another look at the ETS and how it's going to function. Can you just elaborate on that a little bit? It's all sort of really reasonably high level, and I don't really understand what you're saying.
The rules that currently exist under the emissions trading scheme are reasonably conservative and are principally around managing the Crown's risk with respect to the international rules around internationally traded emissions units and therefore the liability on the Crown. And what that means in practice is that the look-up tables which guide the issuance of units for forest owners are discounted to some extent to be on the conservative side. And so you can get your own auditing undertaken if you wish to get more precise measurement, but that often involves quite a lot of costs. So there is some inbuilt conservatism in the mechanism. Another example of that is that you get your units as the forest grows, and that typically means that, particularly for longer-lived species, you're not going to receive much in the way of carbon revenue for some time. And so taking an averaging approach, which gives you the average volume of units you could expect over the life of the forest each year, rather than very few at the start and lots at the end, can be a way of bankrolling, if you like, or getting that revenue flowing more easily. So there are just a couple of areas where there's been long-standing concerns. Also, riparian planting typically doesn't qualify unless it is 15 metres wide either side of a river or a stream, and often the erosion planting we do on hillsides doesn't meet the formula as well. So if we are to incentivise more afforestation through the emissions trading scheme, the government's got the opportunity to loosen the rules, if you like, potentially at some risk or cost to the Crown, but to get some wider benefits, and that's what we'll be submitting on.
That's really.
Thank you, Chair. 8.3, where you've trebled the order for native plants for next winter, which is really cool. I assume that's kind of waiting for Nikki to get up to speed with their side of the accord.
Yes, it is. It's with our existing providers. Included in that is the whakaki marae. So we have some existing marae-based provision. But look, this is really just a starter for 10, because it's until we get our people out in the landscape working with landowners, on a full-time basis, we're not going to know what the demand looks like. What we don't want to do is order a whole bunch of stock that can't be planted.
Yep.
And so we're taking a bit of a guess. We will get a heck of a lot more precise about what that demand looks like once we've got all our systems and processes in place.
Okay. Because my other follow-up question for that is, are you confident that you're able to, that the suppliers are able to meet that requirement for us?
I think the trebling for next year, yes.
Confirmed orders.
Yep.
Councillor Barker?
I have two questions. First question is, with respect to Kahitia Accord, I understand that we have at the moment an MOU, which is a pretty loose, informal arrangement. What do you see as the next steps to giving this a bit more solidity and strengthening it to move forward? And my second question, other being a supplementary with the indulgence of the Chair, is on the MOU with the corrections. Can you give us an update on whether we've done with that?
Okay, so in response to the first question, there's probably three aspects in which some more formality is likely to come to pass. The first relates to nursery supply, and as nursery supply is established by Kahununu, we are anticipating getting into contractual relationships with those nursery suppliers, whereby we will provide some signalling and certainty around our demand, and that will enable confident investment on the other side in terms of nursery establishment. In terms of workforce, as we bring properties on stream with planting programs, that's going to create workforce demand, and I anticipate that as they develop workforce capability, that we similarly provide some contractual certainty around that. The third area is in forest establishment itself, and Ngāti Kahungunu has established at this point a subsidiary company, Tūtira Partnership Limited, and they have indicated to us that they are interested in the Regional Council becoming a 50% shareholder of that company. Before we do so, under the Local Government Act, we will be required to consult, and indeed we have advised the community that we will. So what I anticipate happening is once this investment study comes forward and we get a clear picture of the investment opportunity, that then informs a consultation document, and we take that to the community, and this council will deliberate on and decide whether it wishes to enter into a formal investment partnership with Tūtira Limited. So that lies ahead and is very much part of the intended work program. With respect to corrections, we've had discussions with corrections and also with ministers. Funding for the Hawke's Bay Prison to develop a nursery, as I understand it, has been contingent on the signing of the Tūtira Accord. Now that has happened, the wheels are in motion for funding to be released to the Hawke's Bay Prison for nursery establishment, and I have sought a meeting next week with Kahungunu to discuss how we take this relationship with corrections forward. Having said all of that, I wouldn't want to preempt any ministerial announcement on this, so none of this will be formally confirmed until such time as it is announced by the Crown.
Thank you. Supplementary question, if I may, Chair. Following up on the MOU with corrections, I would see that the interest that we as a council would have in forming a relationship with corrections could be different than that with Kahungunu. For example, we could be looking at managing a lot of, we're intending to do more in riparian plantings, much more in terms of estuary work and estuarine work and doing those restorations. So that's work that would be the council, and I would see that that's something that we would do directly with corrections, possibly using their staff.
Oh, look, there's every intention that we will have those direct activities occurring. The thing we've been navigating is there's been some sensitivity around what is a well-established and reasonably primary relationship between Ngāti Kahungunu and the Hawke's Bay Prison, and some sensitivity on behalf of the prison about ensuring that in this area that the three parties are all aligned and working together. So we're just working it through.
Sure, as long as that. Thank you.
Councillor Hewitt.
Thank you, James. One of the tensions in when we're looking for nursery providers is that locals like to have the opportunity, and we have in here that where commercial opportunities exist, council will not compete with private investment. So I'm wondering how that reconciles with Ngāti Kahungunu taking on the development of nursery supply, and will that mean we are in fact competing with?
So at this point in time, we're not proposing to fund the establishment of any nurseries ourselves. We are proposing to put our orders into the marketplace, including making opportunities available for Marae or other community-based providers to pitch for that work.
Will you make it local first as a preference?
So we typically do focus on local suppliers in our procurement. That's the way we go. We have historically got some supply from Taupo and Native Nursery, but I'm not sure whether they're still operating given the circumstances they've been under in recent times. But predominantly we do get them from local supply.
And so when Ngāti Kahungunu is doing that if we're involved, that requirement will still carry over?
Look, what we don't proposed, well, price and quality will still be a key determinant of what we procure. So where there are community-based initiatives, the expectation will be that the quality of the nursery stock supplied will be to spec. And then in terms of pricing, we obviously cannot dictate how low they may go. That's over their own cost structures and then meeting their own requirements. If there are funding grants that come from various parties, then so be it. We have got some experience in this regard. The Ngā Whenua Rahui Fund has funded the whakakī marae to a large extent with public money, and they have been a key supplier for us.
And Waimarama?
Yes, so there is some precedent here. The comment I would make is that the demand profile we're looking at here has enough, and it's not just us, it's obviously every regional council and a range of other parties as well, has enough demand in it probably to satisfy all the supply. And so I don't think people need fear this at this point in time.
Can I just add to that, sorry, Chair, with your indulgence, can I just add to that, James, or probably through Brian and Mike? There's also an old adage that if you're going to plant a tree, you shouldn't take the seed from out of the district. It should be grow your seed locally. And
yeah, that's eco-sourced. I've had a problem with the council buying them from Taranaki and Taupo just based on price. But with the nurseries, whether they're public nurseries or nurseries that are run by Māori trusts, there's going to be, they won't be able to supply enough, so there's no worry about treading on people's toes. There's not enough nurseries for what's planned.
Would someone care to move the 7 seconder?
Sure.
Councillor Barker, would you like to speak? Councillor Barker?
No.
Any other speakers? I would like to make one comment, which is on this paper, the supplementary paper, it's a commendable group of people have been brought together from an expertise standpoint. Scion, Canterbury, Dryland Forest Initiative, et cetera, all well and good. Then there is a one-line reference here, a technical advisory group of experienced local forestry and farm forestry stakeholders will be convened to peer review and test the outputs of the project team at each stage. To me, that's extremely important. The experts can be found in a variety of places, but what gives us permission more than expertise, or both, I should put it that way, is taking full advantage of the locals who know something about this. And so I would like to see this technical advisory group identified promptly. There are 10 or 12 names floating around, like Mike Halliday and others that you're familiar with, because I think it will be important that this local group of experts feel that they're very much on top of what's going on, have had opportunity to comment and so forth, because they're the ones that'll be sitting here locally telling us we're either full of it or we're on the right track, regardless of what the external experts have to say about it. So I just encourage that to progress as smartly as the rest of this has. On that basis, I'll call the question. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried.
Good decision, Chair.
Last, Tūtira Forestry.
Yes. Chair, just like to introduce Ben Douglas. So Ben's our Forest Management Advisor. So I'll just introduce the paper and then Ben can fill in some of the details. So at a high level, there's really two parts of this update. The first is just an update on the preparatory work that we're doing for harvest. So we've now completed the first part of the road and have contracts in place for one of our major bridge structures, and tenders have closed for the second part of the road into the forest. So we're well on track with those activities. The main part I think we want to focus on with this time is just to get a I guess, a level of confidence from the council around the criteria used in the multi-criteria analysis that's coming up with the options for reforestation. You'll notice in the paper there, most of the weight is actually put on conservation, with a smaller weight of around 15% on the commercial aspects. So I really wanted to walk away with an understanding that council is comfortable with those criteria, because they ultimately push us in the direction of the reforestation. We have included the base case in the analysis of the type of commercial crop that is there now, being the Pinus radiata, and that's really as a comparison position, both from a commercial perspective and also just understanding the soil conservation properties that those types of crops have. So you can look at the analysis there and see the assessment, and perhaps we have some discussion around that. The reason we need to tie the reforestation up now is that there is a dependency on how around how the harvest occurs. So depending on the different reforestation options selected, that actually impacts how the forest is felled initially. So there's some interdependencies there. Also just want to apologise, there was an error in the attachments. We inadvertently attached a map of the forest rather than a map of one of the recommended reforestation. So we have that here, and we also have a copy of the MCA analysis if we want to go through any details of that on the big screen. So I really just wanted to hand it over to questions or any discussion.
Councillor Bailey?
Thank you. When you just went through the weightings, you talked about soil conservation at 35%. Then you said it's comparison to economic values at 15%. You've also got cultural values at 15%. You've also got biodiversity values at 15%. You've also got landscape amenity values at 15% and education and recreation values at 15%. Why did you specifically mention economic values at 15% and not all the others that are at 15%?
Simply for time, I was providing a high-level summary. We've got the detail of the MCA analysis here. Of course, we need to look at all those aspects. That's what forms the analysis. Also want to acknowledge that Tūtira is our most profitable forest out of all the forests. A lot of the forests on soil conservation are marginal to begin with. Part of this discussion is testing the level of interest in commercial outcomes for our forestry portfolio versus how far we swing on the pendulum. So that's, for no particular reason, mentioned those two. The full analysis is here. All aspects have been taken into account for that particular analysis.
Further questioning. The community stakeholder group that we've had going, is that due to make a recommendation, well, that's made a recommendation already as to what they would expect to see replanted?
Yeah. So the process with the community stakeholder group was carried out before my time with council, but it was a very robust process. Subject matter experts involves Garth Isles, the Guru of Soil Conservation, strong community input, and they've gone through that process. They've come up with this option here, which is really good, and on the understanding that this option would be put to council to make the final decision. In this paper here, I've just made some other notes on some other factors that are important to bear in mind in making that decision, and just being very careful that council has all the information it needs in order to make that decision. Because the regional council forest portfolio is not a straightforward one. It does have a lot of intricacies to it, and I think this does need to be seen in the wider context of that portfolio in order to make an informed decision. And equally, any information missing from this paper, I'm happy to go and find and come back to council with.
Okay, thank you for that. One further question, Chair, for the Chief Executive. At the moment, we're going around tearing our hair out with the tank stakeholder group, with Tangata Whenua, wishing to question the recommendations from the tank stakeholder group on the tank plan change. In this particular paper, we've put up two options. One is which is what was described as the status quo option, and the other one, which is the one from the community stakeholder group. I'm just wondering how seriously we're taking recommendations from community stakeholder groups, because at the end of the day, we either accept the recommendations or we don't. So if I was one of the Tangata Whenua members on RPC and was being called into question for questioning the findings of the tank stakeholder group, I'd be pretty frustrated to see this particular paper and the fact that we are placing an option up against the community stakeholder group recommendation. I'm just wondering how seriously we're taking the community input on these things, because we've got to do a lot of this in the future. And if I was a member of the community and was asked to be on a group to put together a recommendation like this, I'd go, why would I bother?
So, Councillor, first thing I'd say is that we take the input of the community stakeholder group very seriously indeed. I think this is quite a distinct process to that of the tank plan change, where there was a deliberate decision taken to establish a collaborative group to make decisions on behalf of the community on a community's plan in relation to an entire catchment and all of the common pool community resources that exist. Here we're talking about land owned by the council, forests owned by the council, so they're the council's own assets, and you as councillors will need to make some decisions here that will come at a cost to both the council and to the ratepayer. And so I think the nature of this is more akin to getting advice from our neighbours and from the wider community about how to best to manage our asset, and to that extent, I think it's appropriate that we hear their views, but you are also fully informed about the implications of those views for your other responsibilities in terms of managing the impacts on the ratepayer and the financial prudence with which you've got to manage the council's assets and resources. So, look, I'm comfortable with the idea that the views of that community group are provided in full to the council, and we undertake analysis both on what's recommended and on the counterfactual for you to compare and contrast between. So I don't think there's any reason why the community group in this case should feel that their input is not being valued. There are actually similar tests with the tank plan change that you have to go through. You're yet to receive the Section 32 report on the costs and benefits of the tank plan change, and you'll need to weigh all those up before making a final decision about whether what the tank collaborative group has recommended is indeed appropriate. So even in that case, where there was a high degree of devolution, there are still residual responsibilities on you as decision makers.
Mr. Chairman?
Councillor Cruden?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Obviously, it's at the end of the day, this council decides the weighting applied to any stakeholder group, and we do need to see the options in front of us which we've got. One of the things that I'm not seeing in the paper, though, is a costing of option 1 versus option 2, and I'm not seeing that you're asking us for a decision today. So can I expect to see, I mean, obviously with the status quo option 1, there won't be such a large investment up front, number 1, and number 2, the harvest result will be substantially greater than option 2. So what are the financials that go with making a decision on these two options?
So the process from here is really to get a level of comfort that the analysis to compare the various options is robust and there's an alignment with council, and we'll then take any other feedback away, and we'll price up not every option, but probably the top 2 or 3 options, and bring them back to the next council meeting for a decision, so that there's purposely no financials in this paper. Once we have that alignment, we'll take top 3 options and price them up to return them at the next meeting for a decision. This is really just for information and any feedback at this time.
Sorry, are there,
Councillor,
Mr. Chairman.
are there 2 or 3 options or more options?
Excuse me?
Councillor Dick?
Sorry, Chair.
Well, my question follows on from Councillor Curtin. There's no recommendation as to which option should be taken up. So, in fact, you're not asking for preference. You're looking for some feedback,
Yeah.
but not looking for a decision today.
That's correct, yeah.
Okay. All right. Can I just follow on and give my opinion? And that is that subject to the further information, I do not believe that option 1 should be discarded or discounted. You know, we don't make cars or televisions anymore in this country. We import all that stuff. We survive as a nation on the sale of food and fibre, and I think we've got to keep economics and economic sustainability well to the forefront.
Councillor Hewitt?
Thank you. So Chris, welcome to the hot chair. You're feeling a bit of it today. I'd have no disrespect to any stakeholder engagement group, and I certainly am a strong advocate in protecting it, but I'll just pass the comment. When I was attracted to regional council as a councillor, elected rep, I liked the fact that there was a balance of social, cultural, environmental and economic. So when I do the maths on these weightings, I see social sits at 30%, cultural 15%, economic 15% and environment 50%. And I'm not saying to take away from the environment, but I think the economics is a little bit low, and at the end of the day, we have ratepayers who like to see their rates reduced, and here's an opportunity. So that's my feedback that you've asked for. I'd like to see that weighting a bit higher.
And I would note that the weightings that you have put in here add up to 110. So somebody's going to have to
Right.
give.
Yeah.
So you have to find a little fat there somewhere. And I guess I think, anticipating what Paul said, the so-called composite option doesn't exist yet, right? This listing under point 15.3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different options. Those are all separate. There is no composite option at the moment, right?
I think that's number 3, isn't it?
Yeah, so the composite option came out of that multi-criteria analysis, and this is what came of it. So this is the composite planting option. And
where is that described here?
It's a composite of the preferred options here. So it's a composite of the commercial native forest, the native regeneration, the managed native regeneration, and sorry, I should have made that clear. The last two, point 15.34 and 15.35, didn't make it in. So it's a composite of those 3, plus the radiata.
So it's the first 3 plus some radiata.
Yeah,
is the
comprises
composite.
Yeah.
And was that recommended by the group?
It's so, and once again, I wasn't here for this, but my understanding of it is that, and Councillor Bailey might be able to correct me if I get this wrong, but there were 2 community meetings, and discussion was had on what the agreed values of the park were, and those agreed values all go back to the management plan since 2004, I think. So those are the values that are described here: the cultural, economic, biodiversity, recreation, and soil conservation, with the greater weighting on the basis of it being a gazetted soil conservation reserve, and that being the primary reason for its purchase. Secondary reason for its purchase being the educational recreational values. So that's how the values came about, and then discussion within the group led to the weighting of the various values, and there was a field trip, and Garth Isles, our soil conservation guru of the region, he went away and did a land use capability assessment and tied all that information in together to come up with the composite option you have here.
So this is Garth Isles' recommendation.
Garth Isles' input into the land use capability and soil conservation aspects of it, community recommendation.
So it is recommended by the community.
Yeah.
Is that your understanding?
Yep.
Yep. Right. Okay.
Any other feedback before we accept the report?
Just a very short comment from me. I'm inclined to agree with Debbie on this. I think the economic weightings are on the low side, and I'd like to see an analysis that, even if it's a comparative one, that puts it up to, say, 30, just so we know what we're looking at.
If that goes up, what goes down in terms of the other criteria?
I'd proportionally bring them all down.
Okay.
Plus the other 10.
And knock 10% off.
Probably social.
Councillor Curtin has moved. Any seconder to receive the report? Councillor Dick? Any other comments for you?
Oh, just briefly, that thank you for the report. I look forward to the next iteration, which clearly needs to spell out option 2. And, for example, you mentioned the radiata component of it, which doesn't quite appear in 15.3. And if you're eliminating the last 2 of that, clearly, it'd be clear, we need to be clarity around what the option is and what it's going to cost us and the implications on the returns to council.
Any other comments, Councillor?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Look, you might have worked out I was a little bit frustrated with the paper. That's because, to me, it wasn't quite clear exactly what you were after from us today, which led me down a garden path which perhaps I shouldn't have gone down, but such is life. I agree that when we're going forward, we should be looking at doing the scoring that you've set out in 15.2. But I'm comfortable if you want to rejig those to Councillor Bevan and Councillor Hewitt's kind of where they're coming from. I'd be fine with that. And then we can look at something a proposal you bring forward with the definite options as to what we're looking at for the replanting.
Okay, we have a motion to accept the report. All those in favour?
Aye.
Opposed? Carried. Irrigation checkup. Thank you, sir.
So it's Mark Heaney's running it.
We haven't seen you much in front of
Change the work program.
Proceed. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Monique Benson. I'm a water management advisor here. And
I'm Kate Jefford. I work in the water team here at the council.
Sorry, I missed the name. Can you speak up?
Kate Jefford.
so I'm taking the paper as read, so I won't cover too much of the detail. There's just some of the key points that I think we need to follow through with. The importance of work like this is maintaining irrigation efficiency is a key building block for achieving good farming practice. It has multiple benefits for region-wide water management and for optimising crop quality and quantity. So it has benefits on both sides of the coin. The program was established to be a hands-on practical way of promoting irrigation efficiency. There's nothing like learning something new when you're out there doing it. So understanding how well a given system is working is the first steps to water efficiency or irrigation efficiency. The program was a voluntary program, and it ran over the 2016-17 summer, and Irrigation New Zealand were key consultants for the project. And we're currently preparing to run the program again for the 2018-19 summer. Overall, we assessed 41 properties, and that equated to 51 irrigation systems. So, there were a number of findings through the project, although we weren't specifically looking to collect data as such. We were really trying to boost irrigation efficiency, performance levels, but through surveying the participants, we did find that most of the orchardists were actually using some methodology to support their irrigation decision making, whether that's soil moisture meters, monitoring software, or consultancy advice. Quite a high proportion were using consultancy advice, so we were quite impressed with that. And one of the other good news stories out of it was that we found that almost all of the new systems performed well for both uniformity and application depth benchmarks. It would have been a 100% result, but I think someone had an unknown answer to one of the questions. So it's almost 100% on both those benchmarks, which was not the result that came out of the Canterbury study. So we can be really pleased that the irrigation systems that are going in at the moment are to a good standard. But we did notice that at about the 10-year age mark, performance did decline for both uniformity and application depth. So that did indicate that as irrigation systems get older, they do have a greater demand for maintenance. And at some point, they would have to be decommissioned. But I think it's probably too early. You'd have to do some serious assessment on an irrigation system before you said it was past the end of its life. So we'll mainly focus on system maintenance at this stage. So the program helped participants who suspected their irrigation systems had poor performance, and it helped a number of them push for repairs and upgrades. So we were really pleased with that. And for those with the newer systems, as it turns out, it just gave them reassurance that the irrigation systems were doing what they were supposed to be doing. And if there were any minor upgrades, we were able to help point that out. So we ran a post-program survey as well, just to see how people viewed the program. All of those that responded, notably that it was not 100% response rate from all the participants, but those that did respond to the program, the post-program survey, all of them found that the program was useful, and all of those that had room for improvement were working on it, on their systems, or they were working towards replacing the irrigation system. So we found that a really positive result. And with the changes in policy, with plan changes that have just gone through and coming up, there is greater light being shone on how irrigators operate, and so we feel it is important that there is some support mechanism to help irrigators get up to speed or assist them with this behavioural shift. So rather than too many sticks, we're trying to provide some carrots here. So, and so we really did want this to be a voluntary program, and there was no negative repercussions on them for participating. We wouldn't want someone to hold back thinking their system was operating poorly and not ask for assistance. So we do have to maintain that goodwill for the sake of the program. Cost, the program came in at around $50,000. We had 2 summer students that were out in the field, and the funding for this came from the Water Information Services project, and it was, it fits well within that program.
Monique, thanks for that. I have 2 questions. One, you talk about some of these folks using new systems, and the new systems are more effective and efficient and so forth. Did you encounter folks that you would regard as really leading edge users of best technology and so forth, and what would that mean by comparison to the others? And secondly, I read this looking at all these different measures, but yearning for a bottom line that said our conclusion is this about the overall efficiency of water use by these folks? Because if our chairman, as one example, will go around and say, like, you know, everybody could save 20% more water if they used best practice systems, good systems, and so forth. What would your takeaway be? Did you see a lot of opportunity for water use savings, A, and B, what constitutes best practice?
It's quite a tricky one to answer, but if we can get, without going into the technical detail too much, if you have a system which has a poor uniformity, you're going to be applying too much water in some areas and not enough water in other areas. So basically, you want that flat line of uniformity. So it's actually quite difficult to quantify from the project that we've done. I can come back at a later date and we can discuss coefficient uniformity or the coefficient for that. But yeah, it's something that is really difficult to quantify. So,
but you all spend a lot of time in the field looking at people doing this on a day-to-day basis, using the systems that they have available to them. You must have formed some impression as to, you know, overall, you know, what's the headroom in terms of greater efficiency?
I think there were certainly examples, yeah, the likes of Bostocks, for example, would have an app on their phone where they could literally just turn on and off pumps, and they knew exactly how their systems were operating, and regularly they're going through and checking lines and things like that, because it's some serious upkeep and maintenance. And so we could see that there is a shift between those that have invested a lot of money into these new technologies, and then there's ones that we just want to educate, you know, basically how do we do these simple pre-season checks, because it is really easy. Like we used, from Irrigation New Zealand, an app, and essentially you say this is how long the system is, say a pivot 450 metres long, and it'll tell you how many buckets to lay out, and you know it's pretty user friendly, and yeah, so there was certainly a divide between that were, yeah.
I think there's two real layers to water efficiency on with irrigation. It's making sure that your irrigation system can physically operate efficiently, and that's what this program was focused on. And then the next layer is the operator operating it efficiently. Are they turning it on and off at the most appropriate time? So it's trying to get those two prongs sorted out, but you have to get the system operating efficiently first. And it is tricky to have a percentage of savings, because you might be operating extremely efficiently, but the difference is whether it's a dry year or a wet year. You could have a 10% savings or a 20% savings from one year to the next, but that could just simply be because of the climate conditions. So it's a really tricky one to put a mark on. I think what we need to focus on is that irrigation systems are performing efficiently, and then we need to tackle this, the operator.
Okay, Peter?
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, I'm a little bit like Tom. I was hoping to find a paper that would say, if we do X, Y, and Z, we'll make 20% water saving efficiencies, because at the end of the day, that's what we need to be able to do in all of our catchments, and in particular, it's been highlighted, of course, in Ruatanawha and here in Hawke's Bay. And in that regard, these efficiency circles that you've given us, they talk about the level of efficiency, but they don't make it clear whether it's because people are overwatering or whether it's because they're applying the right amount of water but unevenly across their properties. And I think we really need to think about giving us more information that hones down onto what the issues are, because that tells us what the fixes need to be.
What this focuses on is the uniformity. So yes, it's how evenly the water's being placed at different.
Oh, so it's got nothing to do with whether you've put too much water
No.
on at all?
No, so that's...
Because that's critical as well.
Yes, that is also critical.
No,
as
we
part
were
of the
looking
plan.
at application depth as well as part of that.
Yes,
Yeah,
sorry.
so for
that's not how
example,
they wrote it.
you think you're putting 15 mils on your crop and you've set it up on your pivot, and actually what we're physically measuring out of these buckets shows that actually you're 20 mils, so you're over by 5, so we need to button it back, or the opposite, where you're actually under applying. So that did tell this, we did measure that as well.
Yes, so we did that, but not the scheduling aspect of it. So, yeah. What we are looking at focusing on for the coming season, now that we know that the older systems, those with older systems need a little bit more of a helping hand, we will be focusing on those that we suspect as poorer performing or that need a little bit more assistance, rather than, now that we're quite comfortable with the newer systems operating well, so then we can get greatest bang for buck, and then we can probably start coming back with some more figures on what sort of savings we can actually get for the region.
Any other comments, questions?
Just a comment, Chair. Thank you for the paper. I actually found it quite fascinating going through and reading it, especially the graphs on paragraphs 21 and 22, which are the bar graphs, which demonstrate to me how important it is to keep this particular infrastructure current, rather than hanging on to it for even a day, as some people tend to do.
Yes, or keeping it maintained.
Yeah.
Yes, and that also highlights the need for people to regularly check the efficiency of their system, so that they know where they are on that graph.
Move the report be received.
Okay. Second by Councillor Bevan. Any other discussion?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Just a comment on the report. I think what's been highlighted is, one, the scope of the project. I haven't seen the scope itself, but those outcomes need to be very clearly defined. For a $50,000 project, and clearly there's more to spend, that clarity around outcomes needs to be there. Secondly, I'd be interested to see the communication strategy that goes to transmit this knowledge out to the broad populace out there, users out there. So maybe that's part of your next report back to us. But I think we do need that clarity around what the outcomes are, and how we're going to get the outcome, and also how you're going to transmit. Otherwise, this sits on a shelf with limited application, and we need to do better than that.
Our ultimate goal is to have all irrigators operating with efficient irrigation systems. That is our ultimate goal.
That reminds me, would this then be part of the education of our land management teams that are now going to go out and talk to all these farmers? Would they be equipped to talk to them about optimal irrigation practices?
Possibly more sits.
Yeah,
sits
so
on our shoulders.
they would have enough knowledge to kind of deal with the simple stuff. But the intent is that these ladies are the go-to. So if we find a place where there's a need for more discussion with landowners around irrigation and irrigation efficiency, it'll be one or both of these ladies that would do that.
Sorry, there's just one more question I'd like to ask. You will have looked across a number of production types, like there'll be permanent crops and annual crops and so forth. Were there any trends? I mean, you only did 41, so it's perhaps a little bit hard question to answer. Did you find any trends across particular sectors of horticulture?
It was probably, as I said, that the orchardists were doing quite well on seeking advice on scheduling efficiency. We did find that those with pivots and guns tended to not seek that advice, so that's one area that we can work with irrigators.
Where you can see it talks about guns being slightly more inefficient than other systems, is because obviously it's not a permanent setup, and so across Hiratonga Plains we have so many leased blocks. People aren't willing to invest as much fixed infrastructure, and so I think it's trying to improve that bottom line. So maybe over time we'll have less and less guns and travelling irrigators and more.
But it is a clarion call to people who have got older systems, and if you can find some way to turn this into, let's say, a 1 or 2 page summary, I'd love to get it out through, for instance, the Pipfruit New Zealand News, and there'll be some other outlets like that where you might get access to, a number of water users who will look at this and think, oh, I better check my system.
We have got a group that we've just recently established with the larger water users and mainly focused on the Hiratonga Plains, and some of these issues, we are developing a media campaign with that group to get information such as that out. That wasn't specifically on there, but I can raise that with the group at our next meeting. So.
I'm happy to help with you.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a motion to accept the report. All those in favour?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Thanks, Monique. Kate?
Thank you.
Biodiversity Forum.
So I'll just invite Genevieve, is going to come and lead a presentation. Genevieve, have you been in front of council before? No. So,
It'd be nice.
So Genevieve's employed by us working with the Biodiversity Foundation and all of the work that they've got to do. Again, the chair requested an update on the activities, and I think Genevieve's got a presentation. Just that keyboard there and the mouse that she'll run through and probably take questions at the end of it.
You see? Really small.
Let's go right to the bottom. The little, that's it. Next one across.
So small on that screen.
That's it.
There we go.
Thanks for that introduction, Anne. This is a little bit of an update, particularly on 2018 pieces of work that we've been doing with Biodiversity Hawke's Bay. So the council has been involved in this space since 2011, but the dates particularly to note is that in 2016 the Hawke's Bay Biodiversity Strategy was launched, and at that time an implementation planning group was established, and they worked to create the Biodiversity Action Plan, which is primarily what I project manage. So we've moved from this lofty aspirational strategy, we've moved really quickly from it, strategy to this action plan, and out of that action plan came the need to create some bodies to start moving towards delivering their strategy. So one of those bodies was the Hawke's Bay Biodiversity Guardians. They are now an incorporated society in their own right. Everyone is invited to join the Biodiversity Guardians, and there are 4 tiers of membership. $20 for individuals, $50 for families, schools, marae, $200 for NGOs and small businesses, and $1,000 for corporate sponsors, corporate guardians. So we've just signed up today our 3rd corporate guardian, which is the EIT. The airport are already on board, and the University of Waikato with first guardians. So their main role is to actively own the strategy, to guard the vision of the strategy, to grow the conservation community, and to manage the Hawke's Bay Biodiversity Forum. The second body that was created out of the action plan was the Biodiversity Foundation. So they signed their documents in November. They're now a legally a registered charity in their own right, and their main goals are to grow this endowment fund, $3 million by 2021, community conservation fund, biodiversity partnerships, bank type set up, and to support a forum event. So they are definitely the public face of biodiversity in Hawke's Bay as well. And between the Guardians and the Foundation, we've bundled them up as a branding space to call it that Biodiversity Hawke's Bay, because the feeling was that the general public don't actually need to know the behind the scenes, the differentiation and the role. So as a whole, that is Biodiversity Hawke's Bay. So once all the paperwork was sorted, we needed to create a platform to start delivering these messages. So the HBRC comms team worked really hard. They've created, with the Guardians and the Foundation, this
great new website and the little 2-minute promo video, which hopefully you've all seen. And if you haven't, it is running full time in the lobby, but also on the website. And that video is it's 2 minutes long, and it's getting a lot of traction and just really hearts and minds stuff, bringing people on the journey with us. So the first big event we had was in May. It was the launch of the Biodiversity Action Plan. Quite a few of you were at that event. We had over 200 people there and got some pretty good coverage picked up by the Māori television, in the local newspapers, and we were able to sign up 50 people to become guardians on the night. And Professor Bruce Clarkson was the keynote speaker at that event, so that's where he signed up the University of Waikato as the first corporate guardian. Partnering with both the regional council and the district councils has become, it is crucial for the success of this. It's a region-wide approach. So we spent quite a bit of time earlier in the year writing long-term plan submissions to all the district councils and the regional council. Some success in that space, contributions from Napier City and Central Hawke's Bay District Council, and obviously from the Regional Council, who have been one of the biggest supporters from the very, very beginning. Since the announcements of all the long-term plan hearings, we've had one sit down around the table with all the district councils, CEOs and mayors, and just started to look at how we can collaborate at a regional level. So one of the biggest advantages for us in working with all the district councils is the leveraging that we can and the partnership that we can get from working together. So, for example, with Central Hawke's Bay being the first district council to come on board, we've now worked with them. Our first Biodiversity Forum event is going to be at the Aramoana Marine Education Centre, and by partnering with that district council and having it hosted within their Spring Fling Festival, we're actually able to leverage off their marketing. So the Spring Fling campaign goes out to, the Spring Fling advertising pamphlet went out to 20,000 houses, and we've got our, we've got our logo in there, we've got our advertisement done for free, which is something that we probably wouldn't have been able to do if we hadn't partnered with the district council. So just looking at those spaces where we can work together with these other agencies around the Bay and support each other to start delivering these outcomes. Spring Fling event, the BioBuzz, is totally free. HBRC have put on a bus from Napier Hastings to bring some folk out there as well. And the Aramoana Education Centre are putting on a barbecue. So if you are available, please do come out. We'd love to have you there. The other great partnership we've done in the last couple of months is partnering with Great Things Grow Here. So they're the business brand platform of the Hawke's Bay, and they now have over 300 businesses aligned with them. We're working with them to develop corporate sponsorship packages to showcase how business and biodiversity can work well together. So you've all been in meetings all day today, but you should have in your emails when you get out of here an invitation to this event. And that will be hosted at Mission Estate in 9th of October, and we've got some great speakers at that, and it really is to start looking at how business and biodiversity can work closer together and make those gains in that space. Through Great Things Grow Here, we were also put in touch with the Hillmac Electrical Speech Contest. So that's an inter-school speech competition that's been run across Hawke's Bay. It's just a way to grow the conservation community and also start engaging with young people. When you think that the strategy is a 30-year strategy, we need our 9 and 10-year-olds to be living that message right now, because they'll be our project managers and our future business men and women as well by the time this plan comes to fruition. So the junior competition, the finalists were last Thursday, the seniors are tomorrow night, but you can see from the range of winners that these are schools from all around Hawke's Bay. We've got kids that came down from Nuhaka, from Bledisloe, from Central Hawke's Bay, and it's just a really nice space for these kids to start engaging and learning about biodiversity. So now we're in that space of, we're legally got our documents sorted, we've got our website sorted, we now need to grow our presence and build our brand. So We're presenting at the Eco Conference next Saturday, at the Wetland Symposium later in the month. We'll be at the AMP shows, we've been at the Better Living show, and it's really just building that brand, getting the message out there, bringing people on board through the membership space, and starting to really champion this action plan to start delivering the goods. And that's pretty much my summary. Biodiversity is the foundation of our wealth and health and well-being. You all already know that. That's why you're here. We'd love to work with you closer and bring you on this journey with us. And the more you can support this and endorse this, the sooner we'll be able to achieve those goals. So thank you.
Thanks, Genevieve. Councillor Curtin.
Thanks, Genevieve, and welcome to... I've got a number of comments, if you don't mind. And,
Shall I take notes?
Yes, you can. The first one is, who wrote this paper?
The paper that's in the thing? Me, mainly.
On you. Look, and my comment is this. I've had 2 decades of sitting and reading papers. This is probably the best I've read. It's the most lucid one I've come across, and I hope staff can use this as a template for other paper production, because it's outstanding. So well done.
Oh, thank you.
My next query is in regard to your paragraph 5, and I wonder whether this is an omission. And I've put 5.4 Hastings District Council. Is that an omission, or am I seeing things that it's not there?
They decided not to.
So we've got one of the biggest land areas not represented in our biodiversity strategy. Shame on them. How do we get them to stump up with 50,000? I think that ought to be a challenge for the Chief Executive to make that happen, because it's simply not acceptable. My next question, Genevieve... Well, I forgive Wairau because it's Wairau.
They haven't got any money.
I'll just take you to your paragraph 7 and your paragraph 11. And if you could read those in conjunction. I notice the current trustees are Charles Doughty, Des Ratimer, James Palmer, Connie Norgate, Mike Halliday, Mark Erickson. And then that's the trustees. And then the guardians, the management committee, Connie Norgate, Marie Taylor, Kay Griffith, Amelia McQueen, Keiko Hashiba, and Mark Mitchell. Spot the one person out in each of those groups. So we've got males trustees, but the people doing the work are female. I'm pleased to see that. But seriously, I think we ought to be looking at a better mix on the trustees. So that's a broad comment, clearly out of your orbit. I'll now turn to your paragraph 20, and you've set out there under Objective 1, native species and habitat. Can I suggest that your objectives be a little bit more focused, and I've written in there, substantially increase the scale of Indigenous vegetation in the region. It's probably inferred from the objective, but I wonder whether in fact we ought to be sharpening those up and stating actually what we want to achieve. Finally, Mr. Chair, if you will indulge me once more, I made a comment this morning, or earlier in a paper, to do with the forestry developments that we've got going, and I made a suggestion to the Chief Executive that the Biodiversity Foundation participate significantly in those outputs. The chair of today highlighted the importance of putting on the ground local stakeholders in there, and my own view is formed over the day that in fact that forestry group ought to be led locally and supported by those other groups. But in particular, I'm interested to ask you the question, what plans are there for the foundation and its collective to be involved in achieving the objective around native species and habitat alongside another major plank of council outputs around forestry establishment in the region?
So is the question one directed to council staff or to the foundation to get involved in it?
Well, either or. I'm trying to make the point that we've got a major piece of work here, an important piece for the council, another strand of work going on, and I'm wanting to know that up front and centre is delivery on our biodiversity strategy, particularly around vegetation and establishment.
And that's, I guess, absolutely the value of the work that was done, the zonation work that's mentioned in the paper, is that taking a prioritisation approach, ecosystem prioritisation approach, and figuring out where are the best value places to go and spend our money, which is why council funded that work to support this a year or two ago. That's a key part or a key plank of the work that the catchments team will take in going into those catchments, with working with communities to say where are we going to go first. So where we can get multiple outcomes with a single investment across soil conservation and biodiversity activities, those are the places that we want to go and target is part of our work with communities in those catchment areas. And that's the value of having that intelligence to allow us to do that.
Sure, okay. What I'm suggesting is the go-to entity for biodiversity ought to be the foundation for this organisation.
Is that it?
That's it for me.
Debbie?
Thanks, Genevieve. I just wondered, had you given any consideration to having a corporate gold sponsor category? And the reason I say that is because you make a sale and you make it once, so you might be able to attract a few $10,000 ones in there too, perhaps.
So that's, yes, we absolutely have, and that will be rolled out at the business event next month. We wanted to keep a little bit separate. The membership to the Guardians has been very achievable, accessible to most people and most small businesses around the Bay. The $10,000, the $20,000, the $50,000 sponsorship tiers, we felt that they needed a lot more development and corporate, real corporate focus to it to roll out at that business space. Whereas the membership tiers they're very, very easy to administrate. So
you might have a philanthropic one which can be accessed anonymously, which some people don't like to show
and
what they're donating.
But those are those conversations that you want to tailor to the person, and at $10,000, $20,000, really happy to sit down and tailor for you. Don't want to have to tailor at $20. So whether a partner wants to be big logo on the website, logos on billboards, or whether they are quietly here's some cash, well, not quite under the table, but we want to acknowledge the person and the family or the business how they would like to be acknowledged, and so that's where those are coming out in a month's time.
So do you have with the corporate sponsorship, that sort of fundraising, you're entering a very competitive marketplace. Do you have a proposition that you could put forward to me if I were the chief executive of now, let's say, that would be worth $50,000 to me?
Again, if you've got that $50,000, we'd love to just have that discussion and start building to see what it is that you're wanting to achieve out of this, what it is that we can bring to the table, and go from there. There's really, whether you have a site in mind or whether you have would like to choose one of the ecosystem prioritisation sites, we really would like to tailor it to what suits you best, because it's your $50,000 and you'll want possibly quite different things from Campbell's $50,000.
If I just perhaps could add, I think what we've discussed this as a trust in some length, and we recognise that there'll be some corporates that will want to take a region-wide approach. There's some that will be very, very spatially specific to their backyard, and some might be related to the primary sector. Some might be more urban-based. There's a bit of a mix in there. So the general philosophy is to be flexible, but I think the point you raise is that fundraising is incredibly competitive, and so the value proposition of what comes forward needs to be pretty sharp. And so there's some work being done at the moment to consider how we supplement the existing trust's capability with more dedicated fundraising expertise. So that's a live conversation right now, and we hope to have that certainly resolved by the launch in a month's time.
I have one other question, which is on page 117 in the chart there, that under Objective 1, fourth bullet refers to, we now have the first 100 terrestrial sites selected. It seems to me we've been waiting a long time to actually have this entity come in and say, here is what we're doing on the ground. We've gotten, and I understand all the growth curve aspects of this and getting the organization ready and so forth, but keep waiting to hear when's the rubber going to hit the road here, and when are you going to come in and say, well, here, we haven't simply targeted the first 100. Here are the 5 projects we presently have underway in our own name to show the fruits of all this. How far away are we from that?
That really.
So there's two aspects. You might recall in the long-term plan there was 200,000 for endowment for the trust, and that really the intention there is not to draw down on those funds until such time as the trust has met its target thresholds for a sustainable fund. It's a foundation for that purpose. There was 200,000 also set aside for biodiversity projects, and Campbell can probably speak to the planning work that's going on those.
Yeah, so in terms of the money which was made available in the long-term plan for the priority ecosystem sites, which was $100,000 for capital works and $100,000 for operational works, that basically there's a process being completed right now, which is looking at how we prioritise where that money gets spent. And I would expect to see the initial sort of tranche of that 100, the first few, would be contracted for things like fencing and or other sorts of management activities within the next 3 or 4 months. It certainly wouldn't be outside of 5.
Any other questions, comments? Would somebody like?
Happy to move, Chair.
Seconder for that?
Happy to do that.
Debbie? Okay. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Thank you, Genevieve.
Thanks, Genevieve.
Actually should have let you move that paper, Neil, since you were so impressed with it.
Freshwater Improvement Fund.
So, Chair,
We're getting near the end here.
we are very near the end. Anna and TK are coming up the front here to join us to answer questions. Take the paper as read, aware that it's 3 o'clock and a number of you are keen to get out of here. This is effectively a condensed summary of the work that's in scope or in plan for the hotspot programs, which are carrying on into the financial year, as you're aware. A little bit of detail there. Happy to take any questions.
Is there any bad news?
Not from my perspective, it's all great.
I guess the good thing about these projects are it's all fencing, planting and improving the environment, so you don't really have much negative things to say about it.
I think the other thing is that the roundup that was given to council last ENS committee actually showed the value that we were able to get out of the dollar spent, and there were some significant gains made which we wouldn't have been able to get into had we have not received that boost.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. Whakaki Lake Trust 9.2 on page 121. They've endorsed the Freshwater Improvement Fund with some conditions that we accept. Have anyone got those conditions on the top of their head? What changes were they made?
Oh, look, I don't have the detail in front of me, but it was really the key point for them was that there was a ongoing dialogue and discussion about the next stages around consenting and the where. So it was not so much conditions as in do it this way or have that colour fence sort of thing, but more about how we were to engage with them in the process going forward. Because as you'll appreciate that we've got both Whakaki Lake Trust and Tūtira to the point of understanding that for us to carry the project forward, we need to resolve these consenting issues that sit in front of us around water level management. Until we've done that, were unable to say we've got a project, sign the deed and take the money and get on with it. So it was really about a process to get us to the point where we could get good engagement and hopefully get through the consenting process with a minimum of fuss.
Right.
But I can find the detail if you want.
Oh, look, I'm sure it's not great. I just thought you may have had them.
Not off the top of my head, sorry.
Thank you.
Item 5, 6, and 5, 7, dealing with Tūtira, seem like 2 hiccups. The bubbler doesn't work, and we couldn't get the agreement. We need to reconnect the stream.
That's right. We still had fish kills in Waikopiro for last year when we trialled the bubbler. The modelling that we had undertaken for the aeration system was specifically for Lake Tūtira. So when we installed it in Waikopiro, we had it modelled it at the time. What we're doing this year to change things up from last year is creating is turning the bubbler on and off, creating a pulse action with the view that hopefully the algae that's in the different columns of the lake settles out and is able to die out, and then turn it back on, and then break the stratification, or continue breaking the stratification in the lake. If that makes sense.
That sounds about right. Any other questions?
Are we up to Lake Khartoum? Can I ask
Pardon?
about Lake Khartoum yet?
Yeah, fine.
So Ian, I'm hoping we're on track to spend all that money this year, and I understand you have an update for us.
Yeah.
It's been subsequent to this report.
Sure. So Whātumu is one that we've, I guess, recognising this considerable interest in it last year, we've really made a target of this year. I've been spending a bit of time working with the majority lake, the owners of the majority of the lake bed, or a representative of theirs, with the Tamatea Herotanga Settlement Trust and the Arangi Māori Trust Board representatives, Department of Conservation, Central Hawke's Bay District Council, to socialise a concept of a project around the lake, which basically looks at how the larger part of the lake could be acquired and brought into brought across into Department of Conservation reserve land, which is then under the treaty settlement process that's running at the moment, will be settled out in a management relationship with the settlement entity once it's formed. So we're exploring that possibility and option, and so far I've got around all of the parties and they're all supportive of the concept. Looking now to engage a project manager to bring that together and coordinate the work going forward, including examining some of the legal mechanisms and options that we might have around that transfer and purchase process if it's successful, around understanding the settlement process and how that transfer process could dovetail into the settlement process if possible. And then obviously potentially an acquisition of that larger piece of the lake. So assuming that we can, all of those things come together and work, we may well have a project, and from my perspective, a pretty significant and important and substantial project for that district, for tangata whenua down there and for the region generally. But I'm just a little bit cautious that obviously I've got to line up a few planets here, and so far the indications are good and positive. People are very supportive of the concept. There's a number of steps to go through and some reality that we'll have to confront at some point, which will make it clear whether or not this survives. So there is a good focus on it and a lot of goodwill and interest in doing something there.
Thank you, Chair. I noticed there wasn't an update on the Karamu hotspot. Or did I miss it somewhere?
No, so the Karamu was
it's fixed.
It was it was one that we, if you like, spent the money on last year, but it exists or carries on in the Te Karamu work that Gary Clode's team's continuing with and has done for many, many years.
Yeah.
So the projects that we've identified here are the ones that we're going to carry on with into this financial year for the hotspot spend.
Okay.
So again, it doesn't preclude the Karamurna. So I'm just trying to remember why it is that we hadn't specifically mentioned that. I can't remember why, but the main projects that we carried on will continue. Doesn't preclude Karamu both being funded through Gary Clodes and the asset management team's activities, and also the integrated catchment team activities.
Cool. Other questions? We will.
I have other questions.
Oh, go for it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Kia ora. Can I just go to hotspot Te Whanganui a Rutu, and as I would naturally, just a question. Wharangi Stream, where's that?
Just past Taipo on the true right. So if you head past, it's probably about 200, 400 metres further upstream, and it's one that comes down to quite a V-neck marshland area that's currently grazed, but there are issues with flooding in that particular stream area, and our engineering teams have been called in as well. So we're looking at saying, well, we've got this ability under the hotspots to get some really good outcomes. Let's look at a particular mouth to estuary system and see what might be available.
I don't know my own hood, so I'm going to have to go and walk it.
Go on Pukatitiri Road, and you've got, is it the Brookville station on the left-hand side?
Oh, it's up there.
It's that stream
it's up there.
just...
Okay. I've got it now.
Yep.
Yes, I'm thinking Wharangi down below. Next question moves on to the marine hotspot. And I just want to ask a question around that. Firstly, at 18.2, the sediment characteristics and behaviour, to continue investigating sediment characteristics and variability to understand how sediments contribute to land, from land may affect. Is that the marine habitats you're looking at?
Yeah, definitely the marine habitats.
It's on the seaward side. That investigation is on the seaward side as opposed to the landward side.
Definitely. So the marine hotspot is predominantly based from mean high water spring down. Probably the exclusion to that is the catchment works that we are trialling down in Parongaho Estuary, more similar to Te Whanganui Borotu works. Sediment characteristics and behaviour, that's looking at one of our main stresses in the marine environment coming off our land.
Sure.
We will be looking at quantifying the land-based inputs.
Sure. So you're standing in a river looking at that as opposed to rowing a boat out there?
Yes and yes. So we're doing both. So we're standing in the river looking back and saying how much is coming at us. Yes. Then we're standing in the boat or sitting in the boat and saying where is it going and what is it doing once it gets there.
Sure. And my next question, if you can indulge me yet further, Mr. Chair, I'm looking at the Parongaho catchment and wonder whether in fact it should have been a hotspot on its own as opposed to where it's placed in the marine. Have we simply put it into marine because we wanted to put it somewhere? It seems to me not to fit, even though it's important, but it should have stood alone.
So there are a number of reasons for us looking at Parongaho in this respect. I'm not going to argue that it could be a hotspot on its own. Many of our estuaries or coastal lagoons can be, and Parongaho is probably one of ones that we're seeing declines in recreational ability over years. We're seeing a lot of land-based activities down there that are impacting on the estuary. We also have one of our only remaining areas of seagrass in the estuary. So the find of seagrass in there was what prompted us to actually say we do need to actually go in and start talking to people about around the estuary, similar to what we do in Ahuriri.
Yeah, I guess my point, Mr. Chair, is that I'd hate to see you land-loving scientists gobble up the resources for seagoing scientists.
Not going to argue.
Look, it's a good point, Councillor, and it's fair to say that I think the Parongaho will be one of that southern catchment team's significant focuses. Having been down there many, many, many times, I can see the need for us to deal with sediment in that catchment.
Councillor Bevan.
Thank you, Chair. 9.7 Manuka trials. Through you, Chair, this is a question for James. I can remember when I first came on the council, we'd formed a relationship with Comvita and they provided a paper which I remember Mike Hades showing us in regard to the viability of Manuka and honey production as a viable proposition. That was a number of years ago now. I presume that's one of the options you're looking at with Kahutia.
Yes.
And will it be in the whatever paper you're planning to provide to us on the nature of the potential investment?
Yes, so Comvita are one of the research partners in the project, and Manuka production is very much part of the mix. Yep. And we have got scheduled a report back to council on our overall investments in Manuka production coming to a future meeting.
That's great.
Yes.
Yep.
This one in November.
But thank you. Someone like to move the report? Councillor Bailey, seconded by Councillor Wilson. Any other comments? All those in favour? Aye. Aye. Accepted.
Thank you.
Thank you. Tom, Sperman, give a quick report on Future Farming Trust.
Good afternoon, councillors. The reason this is a verbal report and not a written report is I've been away and the project manager who's supporting this project has also been away, so I apologise for not being able to provide a written paper. So I'll just briefly recap where we got to at a recent meeting was direction for councillors Wilson, Belford and myself and Ian Maxwell to go away and effectively discuss the next step and send out an initial invitation to a group of likely people who could help support the establishment of the Future Farming Trust. That meeting took place back in August, a few weeks ago, and 11 letters have been sent out to a group comprising effectively about 8 farmers and 3 consultants. We have had responses from everyone. Only one is unable to join at this stage. I believe there are a couple of individuals who are receiving phone calls. I've spoken with 2. I think Councillor Belford, you were going to speak to a couple, but at this stage, I suppose we can report that the group of people who were invited are willing and able to turn up and step through come to a first meeting. The purpose of this group, you may recall, is that we are framing this up as a stepping stone. So this is an initial group that is going to help develop the terms of reference, help develop the goals and objectives and outcomes, and then seek to perhaps in the next, within 12 months certainly, to move to the creation of a more permanent governance group, and that works more operationally. So I don't see. So I'm happy to answer any questions. I don't see why we probably can't disclose the names of the people who were invited, but it's just I just chose not to at this stage.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
I read somewhere, I can't recall where it was contemplated that Councillor Wilson would be the second councillor appointee to this board. Has that happened?
Yes.
Well,
It has.
It has. That's good.
You want it or not?
Yeah.
Any other questions, comments? I guess we'll circulate. We probably should close out the last round of calls.
And circulate the names.
And then we can circulate the names of people who have accepted.
Yep.
All right.
Would people want to see the letter? Maybe when we've done that, we can show the letter that we sent out.
The invite
because it's got a good summary.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Operational activities, can we take this as read? A team of several dozen people have contributed to this.
I'll take any questions, Chair.
Councillor?
The report on point analysis, which was actually started December 2018, I think that might be a bit of a faux pas there, but well, there's a time machine in the building that no one's shown me yet.
Dairy lunch works very quickly.
It looks like it. The final report in September, is that a report just for staff, like a draft report for you guys to mull over, or is that coming to us?
It'll be a technical report.
So what are you counting councillors out on that basis?
Well, we haven't, it's interesting you ask, Councillor, we haven't brought technical reports to the council for quite some time because we've got reasonably clear instruction that
So can I rephrase that?
It's certainly available if you'd like to see a copy of it. Absolutely.
Can I see a sort of an executive, perhaps a bit of a summation, or is that an intention of this technical report to convert it to English and distribute it?
We'll certainly have an executive summary.
Scientists don't write executive summaries.
If you would like a specific paper on
1,600-page executive summary, right? Thank you. No, I do have some interest in that. And I note here winter forage crop mapping. Is that just purely about location, or are we trying to ascertain as part of a national overview, because it is quite topical at the moment, how much of our region is actually under winter forage crop?
It'd be a combination both of understanding the land use and then feeding into that broader national discussion and narrative around winter cropping, feedlotting, forage cropping, having an understanding of where it is and the scale and the region's important for us right now.
But I think, to be clear, this is a land science project, it's not a compliance team.
I get that. Yeah.
So this sort of land science is critical for policy development at any stage.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Peter?
Just around gravel consents, which is, I thought this would have been completed a year ago and it's still dragging on. What's the hold-up? This is, it hasn't got a number, on page 128.
That sits with the consents. We've got a Section 92 information request that's been put back to the Assets Management Group for further information. And
that's come from us to ourselves? Or?
Correct. Correct. We engaged University of Auckland experts to have a look at the applications, and they recorded some gaps in the application. So we then put that back to our assets section to provide further information.
Yeah, so we're working through that, and I guess we feel some of the requests are onerous. So asking us to analyse the impact to the ocean processes around the extraction of gravel. So there's a lot of information to provide.
So this is going to drag on for some time?
But we just need to work through the value of the information requested. We also have an obligation to keep gravel levels at certain heights. That's how we manage rivers. So it's just working through the process at the moment.
And it's not uncommon for a Section 92 request to possibly be a bit open-ended in terms of the sorts of things the applicant might come back with, and the applicant might draw a line at some point and say, this is what we believe is sufficient information. We now wish you to process the application based on available information, and you do so knowing that there might be some risks around the outcome. So,
So as I understand it, in principle, the gravel extractors in this area support this. Is that correct?
As I understand, there was earlier consultation through the Local Government Act process.
Yeah.
No, the issues with respect to the assessment of environmental effects.
Well, gravel's got to bloody well come from somewhere. I mean, what's the difference?
Well, Councillor, I'm sure that you would want our consents department to be particularly concerned about the environmental effects and ensure that we're doing a particularly good job of understanding those in our
just becoming somewhat frustrating.
Huge environmental effect going on in Central Hawke's Bay.
Well, that's all the balance and stuff, right?
Anyway, that's enough.
Any other Someone would like to move receiving this report? Councillor Wilson, seconded. Bailey? All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you, team. We've been putting that together. We're left with the new agenda items, additional agenda items, which I have no record of.
Hariri. I've got a list.
Councillor.
Yeah, well, very briefly, Mr Chair, the Te Committee or Te Whanga has had two meetings, its first and second meetings, inaugural and a business meeting since our last council collection. The respective parties have been in the room together. It would be fair to say that the expectations of the respective local authorities are mixed, and it'll take some settling down. I know Napier City has tabled a number of very ambitious and significant plans that impact on the estuary. The somewhat interesting expectation that the committee will sign those off and they will proceed. But the balance of the committee probably has a different view. So there's a bit of settling down to take place around the committee, but so far a very positive response. The interesting thing is participation of Hastings District in the discussions. Again, probably not expecting to have a significant role, but the reality is something like 8,000 hectares of land is in the Hastings District Council, which affect the catchment zone. So we're hoping that Hastings appreciates its role and the significance of its activities in that zone, particularly around planning and activities that they have jurisdiction over that impact on the estuary. So there's quite a lot of work to be done in settling down, but I think a little bit of an underestimation of the significance of the statutory role that the committee plays, and a growing appreciation of the role. So we look forward to some very interesting meetings.
Rick had an item which we'll have to pass on. Debbie?
Well, James might be able to speak on that.
So the chairman, the deputy chairman and I had a meeting with representatives from Ngāti Ruapani probably 2 weeks ago, like Karamoana. The representation situation up there is a little fluid because there is not a clearly mandated PSG at this point in time that the Crown has accepted for treaty negotiations. Fortunately, Nikki Kitty from our Regional Planning Committee attended the meeting, even though she sits to one side of the group that we met with. In general terms, look, it was an incredibly positive meeting. There's a great will to work closely with the Regional Council around the issues up there. Their greatest fixation is on water, unsurprisingly. That is their most significant resource, and so they are very keen to work with us closely. There's about 1,500 acres, I think it is, of land that they hold up there near Tuai, and are interested in the sustainable development of that land. There's concerns about forestry up there. But look, it was a starting point for building on the relationship that has existed with various folk up there, and I think in the coming months there'll be some clarity around who is the mandated entity, and once that process moves forward with the Crown, it's not dissimilar to the situation up with Ngāpuhi to some extent in the far north. Once that settles down, then I think we'll be in a stronger position to move forward with that group. Yes, and Mike was there too. Sorry, Mike. goes without saying.
Goes without saying.
Debbie, I think you had an item.
I do. So I've recently had a phone call from a woman who wanted me to meet her father. Her father was about to turn 100, and he wanted to meet me and share some of his knowledge before he passed away. And there's nothing wrong with this gentleman. He's as sharp as a tack. but he was wanting to share some of his lifetime of observations and stresses, and just as this big century birthday's coming up in 2-3 weeks, it's sort of climaxing a little bit for him. So he was particularly concerned about the gravel, and so I would urge you to see if we can hurry through with these Section 92 things. But he was just stressing once again, it's not if, it's when that we're going to have a big storm, and there are just going to be huge problems with stop banks breaking, and I mean, I can see it all. I see the amount of gravel that's building up in that Rathbones Bridge that we stood under earlier in the year, was it, or a year ago?
Last year,
There's just an ongoing problem there, and it was just a lovely meeting with a gentleman who was sharing his lifetimes of observations. He also suggested to me that why aren't the bridges of all of the rivers named with the actual river name as well, and he thought that might be something that could be taken up by the regional council just in terms of history and ownership of areas, and I thought that was quite a nice suggestion, so it was one of those interesting meetings. I went on from there to the Prongo Marikiki catchment meeting. So this is one of the hotspot areas within the Toki catchment that was identified through the Plan Change 6 Board of Inquiry process, and a lot of work has been done there over the last few years with the land management team, catchment management team, and it was a presentation of their findings, how they're going. There was a horrible wet night, 7 staff there, so really well turned out, James, and the staff are always outstanding in their presentations. Sadly, there were only 4 or 5 members of the public there, and I wonder, can the comms team get involved in helping publicise these events, because the knowledge and the ability to translate that knowledge was all there, and all the passion from the staff. Just a pretty disappointing turnout.
I believe that is...
Productivity Commission. Whoever raised that.
We have a 2-minute video.
It's from the productivity.
I shouldn't have said anything.
Well, there's this band of radical eco-warriors called the Productivity Commission that has just issued a 600-page report that, among other things, says we should triple the price of carbon, which would certainly make our afforestation program sweet. But anyway, this little video of theirs, in a nutshell, reflects what has become basically mainstream thinking.
New Zealand is committed to actively reducing its greenhouse gas emissions along with the rest of the world. The government asked the Productivity Commission to conduct an inquiry into how New Zealand can transition to a low-emissions economy. We found that substantial change is required, and that a foundation of stable and credible climate policy and institutions will be fundamental to the transition. The Commission recommends that the government should focus on 4 key areas that will work together in order to create this foundation. 1. Reforming and increasing the coverage of the New Zealand Emissions Trading Scheme. 2. Setting new climate laws with emissions reduction targets and budgets, and establishing an independent climate change commission to drive progress. 3. Establishing complementary regulations and policies, such as supporting the uptake of electric vehicles and including methane in an emissions pricing scheme. And 4. Substantially improving low emissions investment and innovation. Getting this foundation right will help to encourage 2 critical changes that are needed for the transition. First, to replace fossil fuels with clean electricity and other low emissions fuels across the economy, particularly in transport, but also in industry. Second, to change the way land is used. This includes encouraging more forestry to offset emissions in other parts of the economy, and changing the structure and methods of agricultural production. Emissions prices will be a critical motivator of change. The Commission finds that prices will need to rise considerably to generate action. Future innovation and technology will help determine the level of emissions prices. The Commission's report on how New Zealand can transition to a low emissions economy has been presented to Parliament. It's now up to the government to decide what action they take. Acting now is vital to address climate change. The decisions we make in the present are critical to our future. Read our report on how New Zealand can transition to a low emissions economy today at productivity.govt.nz/low emissions.
That's it. Radical propositions.
Radical's all right.
Radical stuff
Good
there
grief.
from the business community of New Zealand.
Chair, if I could just make a comment that Madeline Hall and the land management team has reviewed the report for our catchment staff and provided an initial view. Not surprisingly, it's incredibly consistent with where we're going as a council, but I think that one of the take-home messages for them is that there are some considerable social challenges ahead for the transitions that are envisaged in our rural communities from from higher carbon pricing and pricing of emissions from ruminant agriculture, and obviously stronger incentives to plant. This presupposes fundamental change to New Zealand's farming systems and farming communities, and it runs the risk of driving more division in our rural communities around land use choices. And so I think our staff are just very cognizant of, while there's strong rationale for all of this, there are going to be significant social adjustments required, and this is not going to be easy either here in Hawke's Bay or anywhere in the country. So we're on the journey.
Fair enough.
From that though, James, one of the issues we probably can be more explicit with more gains is in our fuel use and efficiency right across our fleet, for example. So an example from the Regional Council, perhaps we ought to be looking at sustainable fuel energy use.
Yeah, look, we've had a pretty thorough program of optimisation of our fleet for fuel efficiency. Tom's taken a particular interest in this, and obviously we've got an EV first policy, and we're sort of heading in that direction. Similarly, we've got solar panels lined up to put on the roof here, and so there's been a lot of work on the energy efficiency of this building, etc., etc. Sort of all the easy stuff's been done, I think. So yeah, we probably don't do enough to communicate the leadership that we're showing as a council in those areas, and that's something that we could focus on.
I've been a judge in the last few weeks for the, believe it or not, the Hawke's Bay Tourism Awards. And one of the
Can you repeat that, Chair?
one of the contestants, candidates, I should say, was Nimmons. And when we were going through there, Katie Nimmons said that they put an additive of some kind in their diesel fuel that has some extraordinary percentage reduction in emissions. I don't know whether they're cooking it up in the back room or what it is, but I intend to look into it more. Her comment about it was was astonishing. I mean, it was like a 40% savings in emissions.
Nitrogen blue it is, Chair.
I'd like to know what that is all about.
All the modern trucks use it there.
Patent that. Anyway, meeting is closed.
Right, there you go.
Okay.